For the first time since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has lost the one advantage it thought it could never lose. The drone war, Russia's bread and butter, its tool of terror, its cheapest path to destruction, has just flipped completely on its head. Ukraine is now launching more attack drones than Russia, not by a slim margin, not in one narrow category. Across the entire front line and deep into Russian territory, Ukraine has seized a commanding, measurable lead in the single most important weapons category of this entire conflict. And Russia, for all its bravado, for all its factory mobilization, for all its Iranian supply lines and North Korean ammunition shipments, has absolutely no answer. What you are about to hear is the story of how Ukraine pulled off one of the most stunning military reversals in modern warfare, a shift that defense analysts on both sides of the Atlantic are calling a genuine turning point. We are going to walk you through the hard numbers, the revolutionary new weapon systems, the multi-layered strategy that took months to execute, and the terrifying implications for Vladimir Putin and his war machine. Because what is happening right now on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine and deep inside Russian oil infrastructure is something the Kremlin never planned for, never anticipated, and cannot stop. And it is only getting worse for them. The numbers hit like a shockwave when they first emerged in early April. On April 8, 2026, the Institute for the Study of War published a detailed operational assessment based on data confirmed by Pavlo Palisa, Ukraine's Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Office. According to Palisa, Ukraine is now employing 30% more attack drones on the front line than Russia. That is a ratio of 3-to-1 in Ukraine's favor, a complete inversion of the balance that existed just 12 months ago, when Russia seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of cheap, unmanned systems. Defense blog covering the same data set described this as one of the most dramatic reversals in the entire war, noting that it upends the long-standing assumption that Russia's industrial base would always guarantee numerical superiority in drone production. But the front line is only half the story. And this is where things start to shift into truly unprecedented territory. According to United 24 Media reporting on April 6, 2026, was the first month in the entire history of this conflict in which Ukraine launched more long-range strike drones into Russian territory than Russia launched into Ukraine. Let that sink in for a moment. Ukraine sent over 900 long-range attack drones deep into Russian territory in a single month, hitting military bases, ammunition, storage facilities, oil refineries, logistics hubs, and command posts hundreds of kilometers from the front line. Now Russia launched 6,462 drones at Ukraine in March 2026 itself, a record for the year. But that figure counts primarily short-range tactical systems. When you compare strategic long-range strike capability, Ukraine has pulled ahead decisively. To understand just how remarkable this reversal truly is, you need to see the trajectory. In 2022, the year Russia launched its so-called Special Military Operation, Moscow sent 3,010 long-range drones at Ukraine. The following year, in 2023, that number nearly doubled to 6,011. By 2024, it surged again to 15,955. And in 2025, Russia hurled an astonishing 26,327 drones at Ukrainian cities, power stations, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure. Year after year after year, Moscow was escalating at a rate that seemed mathematically impossible to match. Ukraine was caught in a defensive spiral, forced to expend expensive Western-supplied air defense missiles, sometimes costing over $1 million each, to shoot down Iranian-designed Shahed drones that cost Russia as little as $20,000 apiece. The economics were devastating for Kyiv. The trend line looked irreversible. And then Ukraine changed the equation entirely. Ukraine did not just match Russia's escalation, it leapfrogged it. And the strategy behind this reversal is a masterclass in patient, methodical, asymmetric warfare. According to in-depth analysis published by the Kyiv Post on April 9th, Ukraine spent roughly 9 months from June 2025 through March 2026, dedicating approximately 1/3 of all its drone strikes, specifically and deliberately, to destroying Russian air defense infrastructure. This was not opportunistic targeting. It was a calculated campaign to systematically blind and disarm Russia's defensive shield. The SBU Ukraine's Domestic Intelligence and Security Service confirmed that Ukrainian forces destroyed an estimated $4 billion worth of Russian air defense equipment in 2025 alone. $4 billion. That represents hundreds of radar stations, dozens of S-300 and S-400 missile launch vehicles, scores of Pantsir short-range defense systems, and countless electronic warfare platforms, all methodically hunted down and eliminated by Ukrainian drone teams operating around the clock. The strategic logic was devastating in its simplicity. By degrading Russia's air defense umbrella over many months, Ukraine created vast corridors through which its long-range drones could now penetrate deeper, fly farther, and strike with far higher success rates than at any previous point in the war. It was not a quick fix or a lucky break. It was a 9-month strategic investment that is now paying returns on a scale Moscow never imagined possible. And this is where things get even more serious for the Kremlin. The first dimension of Ukraine's new drone dominance is the revolution happening on the front line itself. Police's data, as analyzed by ISW on April 8th, reveals that Ukraine is deploying drones at a density, tempo, and sophistication that Russia cannot replicate. The ISW report noted that Russian forces in the Donetsk sector are packed at roughly 316 troops per square kilometer as part of Moscow's spring 2026 offensive, and Ukraine's drone operators are methodically turning those dense troop concentrations into layered kill zones. The backbone of this system is the first-person view drone, or FPV drone, small, fast, agile, and guided in real time by operators who can chase individual vehicles, armored personnel carriers, ammunition trucks, and even soldiers sprinting between trenches. What makes FPV drones so terrifyingly effective in Ukraine's hands is their cost. Ukraine's purpose-built interceptor drones cost between $1,400 and $2,400 each. Compare that to Russia's Shahed-style attack drones, which cost upward of $20,000 per unit, and are now being systematically picked off by Ukraine's budget interceptors before they reach their intended targets. Every exchange destroys Russian capital at a ratio of nearly 10-to-1. The math is not just unfavorable for Moscow, it is catastrophic. And the innovation continues at a pace Russia cannot match. On April 8th, United 24, media reported that Ukrainian engineers have begun deploying a new variant of FPV drone fitted with aerodynamic wings that bolt onto the airframe. These wings dramatically extend the drone's effective range by allowing it to glide and conserve battery power during transit, then switch to full-powered flight for the terminal attack run. It is an elegantly simple modification, the kind of rapid-cycle battlefield improvisation that has come to define Ukraine's entire approach to this war. But it fundamentally changes the tactical calculus for Russian commanders on the ground. Positions that once felt safely out of FPV range, protected by electronic warfare jamming and sheer distance from the contact line, are no longer safe. Ukrainian operators can now reach targets that were previously the exclusive domain of expensive guided munitions or long-range artillery. We will be explaining what that expanded reach means for Russia's increasingly vulnerable logistics network soon. The second dimension of Ukraine's drone advantage is the explosive growth of fiber-optic guided drones. These remarkable systems are physically connected to their operators by a thin fiber-optic cable that spools out behind the drone as it flies toward its target. The cable carries video feed and control signals with zero electromagnetic emission, which means these drones are completely invisible to electronic warfare detection and utterly immune to jamming of any kind. According to the ISW assessment cited on April 8th, fiber-optic drones now account for a full 32% of Ukraine's daily strike sorties on the front line. Russia has developed its own fiber-optic drone program, but Moscow's systems account for only 24% of daily operations, an 8 percentage point gap that carries enormous tactical consequences. Electronic warfare has been one of Russia's primary defensive tools throughout this conflict. Russian EW stations have jammed GPS signals, disrupted radio control links, spoofed navigation data, and forced thousands of Ukrainian drones off course or into the ground. But you cannot jam a physical cable. You cannot spoof a fiber-optic signal. Every single fiber-optic drone that lifts off is by definition immune to Russia's most heavily invested and most relied upon defensive technology. And at 32% and climbing, these systems are rapidly becoming the backbone of Ukraine's close combat drone force. We covered how drone innovation has already reshaped an entire domain of warfare in our video, on how a $30,000 Ukrainian naval drone destroyed a $500 million Russian frigate in Novorossiysk, and the exact same principle of cheap smart systems defeating expensive conventional platforms is now being replicated on land at industrial scale. But before we get to that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching Russia Crisis Report. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit subscribe to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. The third dimension of Ukraine's drone revolution, and arguably the most alarming development for Moscow, is the deployment of fully autonomous AI-powered attack drones. On April 9th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine has begun fielding a terrifying new generation of AI drones that Ukrainian operators have codenamed Martians. These are not standard remotely piloted systems, and they bear little resemblance to the FPV drones that dominate frontline footage. The Martians fly at speeds of up to 300 kilometers per hour and are specifically engineered to be immune to both radar detection and every electronic warfare countermeasure currently deployed on the battlefield. They do not rely on GPS navigation. They do not require radio control links. They identify, classify, track, and engage targets using onboard artificial intelligence, making decisions faster than any human operator ever could. According to the Kyiv Post, Russian military sources have themselves confirmed the existence and effectiveness of these drones, which is a remarkable and telling admission. Moscow almost never publicly acknowledges Ukrainian technological superiority. The fact that Russian channels are discussing the Martians suggests these systems have already inflicted significant damage. IEEE Spectrum, the prestigious engineering journal published by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, released an extensive analysis of autonomous drone warfare in Ukraine in its April 2026 edition, concluding that AI-driven targeting systems are fundamentally compressing the kill chain in ways that render traditional defensive responses obsolete. A human operator needs multiple seconds to identify, classify, and engage a target. An AI system performs the entire targeting sequence in milliseconds. When Russian positions face swarms of these autonomous systems descending simultaneously from multiple vectors, those lost seconds are the difference between organized retreat and total destruction. Now, that is not even the worst part for Russia. The fourth dimension of Ukraine's drone strategy is strategic in the truest sense of the word, and it strikes directly at Russia's ability to sustain and finance this war. Ukraine has taken its expanding long-range drone capability and aimed it squarely at Russia's economic jugular oil exports. In March and April of 2026, Ukrainian long-range drones struck Russian oil port facilities on the Baltic Sea, targeting critical pumping stations, storage tank farms, and terminal loading infrastructure. According to the Kyiv Independent reporting on April 9th, additional strikes hit oil transit facilities in the Krasnodar region deep in southern Russia. The estimated financial impact is staggering. Independent analysts calculate roughly $1 billion in direct revenue losses from these strikes, with the attacks effectively severing approximately 40% of Russia's oil export capacity through the entire Baltic corridor for an extended period. This is not merely a military blow. This is an economic assault on the financial foundations of Russia's war machine. Every barrel of crude oil that cannot reach a tanker is money that cannot purchase North Korean artillery shells, cannot pay the salaries of mobilized conscripts, cannot replace the thousands of armored vehicles and tanks that Ukraine has already reduced to burning scrap metal across the Donetsk steppe. And here is where the broader geopolitical picture amplifies Ukraine's strategic advantage in ways that compound Moscow's problems. Operation Epic Fury. The American-led campaign targeting Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure has already disrupted global energy markets and placed enormous supply-side pressure on oil flows worldwide. With Iranian oil partially removed from the global market, conventional economic wisdom suggested that Russia could fill the supply gap, boost exports, and reap windfall profits to fund its war effort. Instead, Ukraine's precision drone strikes on Russia's Baltic oil ports have ensured that Moscow cannot capitalize on the disruption. It is a devastating pincer effect, Ukrainian strategic drone warfare, squeezing Russia's export capacity from one direction, while American-led geopolitical action removes competing supply from the other, and Russia is trapped squarely in the middle with no escape route. Meanwhile, Russia's own military response has been visibly deteriorating under the pressure. According to the ISW operational assessment, referenced on April 8th, Russian cruise and ballistic missile launches declined by a stunning 52% from February to March 2026. The Kremlin is burning through its remaining stockpile of precision-guided munitions faster than Russian industry can manufacture replacements, and its desperate attempt to compensate by scaling up drone swarm production is now being outpaced by Ukraine's own industrial mobilization. In January 2026, the Ukrainian government announced a national target of producing 7 million drones over the course of the year, an audacious figure that signals the sheer scale of Ukraine's commitment to winning the drone war through production volume. Even if Kyiv achieves only a fraction of that extraordinary target, the industrial asymmetry will be overwhelming. Russia, according to detailed analysis published by the Atlantic Council in early 2026, is scrambling to develop autonomous swarming drone technology designed to counter Ukraine's multi-layered kill zones. But those systems remain trapped in the developmental and testing phase and have not been deployed to the front in any operationally meaningful numbers. Moscow is scrambling to innovate, but Kyiv is iterating faster, testing faster, producing faster, and deploying faster. The initiative has shifted, and it has shifted decisively. So what does all of this mean for the future trajectory of the war? The strategic implications are enormous and potentially irreversible. For the first time in this conflict, Ukraine holds a measurable, independently confirmed and growing advantage in the single most consequential weapons category on the modern battlefield. Drones are not a supporting capability or a niche technology. In this war, drones are the war. They determine every infantry movement shape, every armored assault, threaten every logistics convoy target, every artillery battery, and influence every command decision made by both sides from battalion to theater level. And Ukraine is now winning the drone war across every dimension: tactical quantity, technological quality, speed of innovation, and strategic depth of application. The systematic destruction of $4 billion in Russian air defense infrastructure throughout 2025 was not a lucky streak or a series of fortunate coincidences. It was a deliberate, patient, months-long campaign specifically designed to create the strategic conditions that exist today. With Russia's protective air defense umbrella degraded and full of gaps, Ukraine's long-range drones now penetrate deeper into Russian territory, with dramatically higher survival rates and greater targeting accuracy. That means more successful strikes on critical oil export infrastructure, more ammunition depots reduced to smoldering craters, more command centers destroyed without warning, more logistics hubs paralyzed. Russia's heavily promoted Spring 2026 offensive in Donetsk, which the Kremlin intended as a decisive demonstration of renewed military momentum, is instead being systematically bled dry by Ukraine's drone-created kill zones. Russian forces absorbed a staggering 33,988 casualties attributable to drone strikes alone in the single month of March 2026, according to Ukrainian military reporting. Those are not sustainable losses by any measure, not for any army on earth, no matter how large the mobilization pool or how ruthless the conscription machine. We analyzed the full scope of Russia's deepening manpower catastrophe in our video on how 89,000 casualties are forcing Putin's war economy to implode, and the situation has only grown more dire since. The critical question facing both sides now is whether Ukraine can sustain, expand, and exploit this hard-won advantage, and whether tactical and operational drone superiority can be translated into decisive strategic results that change the map on the ground. The Kremlin is not sitting idle. Russia is pouring every available resource into counter-drone electronic warfare systems, autonomous swarm development, expanded Shahed production capacity, and new defensive doctrines. But every available indicator right now, from ISW assessments to IEEE spectrum technical analyses to on-the-ground Ukrainian operational data, suggests that Ukraine is outpacing Russia in innovation, speed, production volume, and speed of battlefield deployment. The Martian's AI drones that think and strike faster than any human operator. The fiber-optic guided systems that are physically impervious to jamming. The winged FPV variants that extend strike range far beyond previous limits. The ultra-low-cost interceptor drones that are turning Russia's expensive munitions into expensive scrap. These are not prototype concepts in a laboratory. They are on the battlefield today, right now, hunting Russian soldiers and obliterating Russian equipment at a tempo and scale never before seen in the history of warfare. What comes next could reshape not only the outcome of this war, but the fundamental nature of armed conflict for decades to come. Find out more about how Ukrainian drone innovation has already reshaped the rules of modern combat in our video on how a $30,000 drone sank a $500 million Russian warship in the Black Sea. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to Russia Crisis Report to see more of our in-depth coverage of the Ukraine-Russia drone war. And thank you as always for watching.